Hello and welcome to In-Depth Polity and Governance, the initiative which Anantam IAS has taken to come up with daily current affairs videos, but these videos are not going to be daily news simplified videos where one faculty is going to cover all the articles. No. Here, the subject specialist faculty is going to cover the subjects that fall into their domain. So yesterday you saw Gaurav sir's extensive coverage of geography and environment, and today I am here to present four very important topics that have appeared in past 1 week that deal with polity and governance. So without wasting even a single moment, let's now start the discussion. But at the same time, I insist that you keep on visiting Anantam IAS or IAS Anantam website, where we curate very good articles for you to help you in your civil services preparation. So, all right. So the first news that we will start today's discussion is centrally sponsored schemes. Now, if you look at this particular news clipping taken from Indian Express, it talks about CAG finally constituting a committee to look into all the issues and challenges that plague the centrally sponsored schemes. Centrally sponsored scheme have been the flag bearer with which the India has delivered its welfareism across the country to all the residents and particularly the citizens. Now, when it comes to the overall analysis of GS paper 2, especially from the perspective of mains examination, centrally sponsored schemes become very important. It becomes important to holistically understand centrally sponsored schemes. Number one, because there is a line in GS paper 2 syllabus which clearly says welfare schemes for vulnerable sections of the population by center and states. So clearly sort of mandating us to prepare centrally sponsored schemes. But apart from that, if you have gone through the QIP polity or foundation classes, you must remember that how centrally sponsored schemes have become a sort of a problematic thorn in the center state relation. So it becomes important from the perspective of two lines of the syllabus. One is issues and challenges pertaining to India's federal structure, and the second one deals with the welfare schemes for the sections of the population by center state, their performance of these schemes. All right. So in this particular discussion, we are going to understand a lot of the dimensions. Oftentimes I have found out that students do not have clear-cut idea about different names that are given to the scheme. So we'll start from that point. We will understand what actually centrally sponsored schemes are, why the states generally come under the obligation to support the center's initiatives for flagship schemes, and then we will understand why they might be necessary serving some of the purposes given under DPSP, but there are some significant challenges that plague these centrally sponsored schemes. So let's now begin the discussion of the centrally sponsored schemes and what this nomenclature denotes. And so as you can see that this particular acronym has three uh, letters: centrally sponsored schemes. So it is a welfare schemes which are sponsored by the center. Now what does that mean? Are there schemes which are not sponsored by center? Are there schemes which are sponsored by the state? Of course, yes. In order to understand that, let's begin from the basics and go to India's center-state relation that is covered in Part 11 of the Indian Constitution. If you go to the Part 11 of the Indian Constitution, Article 246 lays down the legislative competence of the center and state. Legislative competence means which are the items on which center or the state or both can legislate. So for that purpose, 7th schedule has been created, which creates a union list, a state list, list 2, and a concurrent list. And just by general basic knowledge, we can see that as far as the items of the union list are concerned, both lawmaking power as well as the power to execute them belongs to the union. For instance, the laws in matters related to national security or defense or telecommunication will only be made by the parliament, and generally the execution will only be done by the union. Why did I say generally? We'll come to that. If it comes to the state list, both lawmaking power as well as the power to implement that belongs to the state. But when it comes to the concurrent list, while the legislative dominance has been given to the union, where the laws made by the parliament ride over the laws made by the state, states have been given the executive dominance. So the lawmaking power belongs to union. I mean, it belongs to both, but union has overriding capability. When it comes to the execution of such laws, then the states get the priority unless and until the union parliamentary law clearly delegates such responsibility to the state. So I hope this basics might be clear already, and I don't think I am adding value at this point of time. But when it comes to the ability to spend, there comes the role not just of Article 246 but Article 282, which gives power to both union as well as the state to spend money across the items as far as they are meant to serve public purpose. Now, if you want to pause the video and go and check what Article 282 says, you will see it's marginally headed as expenditure defrayable. Notwithstanding anything said in the Constitution, both union and the state, irrespective of whether they have the ability to make laws on a particular item or not, they will be able to make expenditure, which means the center or the union can make expenditure for the state list matters also and for the concurrent list matters also. And similarly, the states can also make expenditures for the union list as well as the concurrent list. And here begins the schemes which are funded by the center by virtue of Article 282, but which belong to the state list and the concurrent list. And this is what is known as centrally sponsored schemes. Schemes like, for instance, schemes in health, education, agriculture. Have you ever thought, if agriculture is a state subject, how Prime Minister Modi is able to initiate a flagship scheme, Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, or Pradhan Mantri Kisan Yojana, or Pradhan Mantri Krishi Vikas Yojana, PMKY? These are possible because the Constitution of India has created the mechanism of Article 282, which is at the core of the centrally sponsored schemes. Now, lately, what has happened, what we have seen is the mushrooming of these flagship centrally sponsored schemes. Sort of, union is increasingly showing more interest in the matters that do not lie clearly in the union list but lie in the matters of the state list and the concurrent list, and for obvious reason. The matters that are given in the state list and the concurrent list, like for instance employment creation, for example rural roads, for instance housing, they are the matters which right now largely poor country like India faces. And if you want to be a popular political party or a government, it is incumbent upon, it is mandatory for you to look after these concerns. And it would not have been possible had it not been for Article 282. And so lately what we see is that the centrally sponsored schemes now incur around 30 to 40% of the development budget across the country. 5.41 lakh crore rupees last year. So it is not lakhs, it is not crore, it is 5.41 lakh crore were allocated for all the centrally sponsored schemes taken together. Now, these centrally sponsored schemes, once initiated by the union, obvious question you might ask is why the states have to follow through. So for instance, let's say tomorrow, if Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan 3.0 is initiated by the union with some extra feature added onto it, why is it obligatory on Tamil Nadu or Kerala to follow that welfare scheme in their states? One thing that you should always understand, that so I'm writing the title, why mandatory, or why states follow. First thing that you should understand, that there is an article in part 11 which says, to be specific, article 256, which says that if parliament makes a law, then it becomes mandatory on the states to execute that initiative even in the concurrent list. So generally, the concurrent list execution lies with the state, where the law making dominance is given to the union. But if union parliament makes a law, then it becomes obligatory on the states to follow, which means by passing a law, union can obligate the states to follow it. And that's why I think now it would be clear why Manrega was passed in the form of law, why National Food Security Act was passed in the form of law, why right to education became necessary in the form of first constitutional amendment and then right to education act, because through act you can delegate your executive responsibility mandatorily, sort of binding on the states. So if the law is made by the parliament in the union list, and in that law the execution delegation has been done, it becomes mandatory on the states to implement that centrally sponsored scheme, no matter what is the matter. It just has to be a concurrent list. Second reason is that most of these schemes deal with important human development matters. For instance, health, education. For instance, agriculture, where largely rural countries, still India is predominantly rural, and where most of the people are disguisedly employed in agriculture. So if you, as a central government, initiate a scheme in agriculture, in health, in education, it gives a very, very wrong political signal to the electorate that a new good initiative began by the union was rejected by a particular chief minister or by a particular state. It does not seems good, and so it seems like a political opportunity lost. Also, for most of the states, as we have seen, the funds that are allocated in the centrally sponsored scheme have the share of 60 is to 40, but in certain cases it is 90 is to 10, which are say special category status state, Himalayan states. So majority of the states immediately hop on to these centrally sponsored scheme by virtue of the cash flow and very less amount of money that is needed to be shared in as far as the implementation of that centrally sponsored schemes is concerned. Many of the states are already ruled by the party which is ruling at the center, so they automatically join. So if you are one of the states, 4 or 5 states that just appear to be non-conformist, then it does not gives a good signal. Apart from that, Niti Aayog, through its new initiatives talking about competitive federalism, is going to name and shame the states by coming up with regular rankings about the conditions or lack of improvement of these conditions. And that is why most of the states are ultimately sort of devoid of any kind of legal or moral or political option not to hop on to these centrally sponsored schemes. While centrally sponsored schemes face a lot of issues, criticisms, and challenges, which we will discuss, there are a lot of good points that can be thought of in the support of the centrally sponsored schemes. India being a welfare state, a core welfare state is a state which is a liberal state, but at the same time takes care of some minimum social and economic guarantees for its citizens, which is enshrined in the DPSP. If you start reading the part 4 of the Indian Constitution, you can clearly see that it begins with article which makes directive principles of the state policy non-binding or non-enforceable, unenforceable, drawing a sharp distinction between part 3 and part 4 fundamental rights and DPSP, but at the same time it says that they shall be fundamental in the governance of the country. So sort of it is a moral requirement of the state, and here state means the same state which is defined in Article 12, which means it is the responsibility of the union to provide for welfareism, to take care of the environment, agriculture, health, education, livelihood. So it is not completely unconstitutional for the union, because union is also under obligation to facilitate the employment creation, to take care of the people's health, to take care of the people's children education. So when the union comes up with a scheme in the state and the concurrent list which deal with DPSP, sort of union is following the constitution. It is not, there is nothing wrong, and sort of it is a continuation of the constitutional morality, because you are being bound by the values enshrined in the constitution. You are giving full reverence to the constitution. I hope this point must be making sense. At the same time, if you understand India's fiscal federalism, which means the distribution of the revenues between the center and the state, which has been provided under Part 12 of the Constitution of India, you might have realized that disproportionately high amount of income has been routed to the union, because most of the beyond taxation powers like income, like corporation, have been kept under the union list. So union has this large access to resources. At the same time, the borrowing power of the union is unhinged. It is uncontrolled. So since union has this vast resource or vast financial reserve, if the union is using that reserve to distribute it to the states, obviously it is not a bad thing, because left to themselves, states might not have the financial capability to deliver on the promises of the national goals like education, health, and they also form the sustainable goal under United Nations Development Program. So if the center is coming up and giving a push to sort of these welfare mechanisms, then it is not outrightly a bad idea, because ultimately, eventually, overall, a country is going to achieve these goals in a time-bound fashion. Also, since since these welfare schemes are very precise, they are extremely targeted, and when the funds flow, they already have conditionalities, sort of tied funds attached with them. When the center releases, let's say, 86,000 crore rupees for Manrega, it is obviously very, very clear that those funds will be utilized for the purpose of rural employment creation. These are not generalized funds which are left on the discretionary power of the state to be utilized anywhere they want. In that fashion, the center, the union, makes sure that the purpose and the task that has been set out is achieved. If you issue the same amount of 5.41 lakh crore rupees as a generalized fund, you never know how the state are going to use it. But when you create a centrally sponsored scheme and obligate the release of the funds on achievement of certain targets, then you also make sure that those targets are met and achieved by the state, making the progress of the whole country sort of uniform across the states. So that's a very, very important aspect of centrally sponsored schemes. So for instance, if you recall Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, the union gave out around 3 lakh crore rupees over a period of 15 years. It led to the creation of 7.5 lakh kilometers of rural roads, which probably was not even on the priority of the states to create the rural infrastructure sort of veins that would connect each and every village to the national highway or a state highway network. That was achieved. Also, because these centrally sponsored schemes are conceptualized by the union but implemented by the state but funded by the union, it forces the union and the states to cooperate with each other, hence pushing India's federalism towards cooperative federalism. Devoid of these centrally sponsored schemes, the probably both the union and the states would be deprived of around 100 of the committees where they are now forced to interact with each other. So initially, when we started, uh, after the commencement of the constitution, for a very long time the union did not focus much on centrally sponsored schemes, but since last 20-25 years we have seen mushrooming of more than 100 centrally sponsored schemes, and they have become a flagship scheme. But why do states oppose centrally sponsored schemes, and why has CAG set up a committee to look into issues? Because obviously there are a lot of issues or the problems or the challenges that these centrally sponsored schemes face across the country. And these problems are not just, they are not minor problems. They are problems to the extent that probably a lot of the states go on protesting and not onboarding for a very, very long period of time. And eventually they have to be arm twisted by the union. Most of these centrally sponsored schemes, they are in the state list and or in the union list, or in the concurrent list. So in essence, you can say that it is a violation of the federalism, or it is basically nothing but an infringement. It infringes upon the duties of the state. Ideally, agriculture, if it was kept in the state list, it was supposed to be delivered by the state, to be looked after by the states. But by initiating a centrally sponsored scheme in the state list, you are forcing you are forcing the states to follow on the agenda of Prime Minister Modi. Distribution of 6,000 rupees in a quarterly fashion. That's something that the Constitution of India did not think about. So in that sense, it bypasses the Constitution. So the bypass of the Constitution of the Constitution or the constitutional provision is number one. Number two is that it prioritizes the provision of Article 282 over Article 280. What is the difference between Article 282 and Article 280? The difference between the Article 282 and 280 is that Article 280 is that mechanism which is supposed to divide the divisible pool, net divisible pool between the union and the state through the Finance Commission. The provisions are given in Article 270. Now, which means that the Finance Commission will recommend how much of the revenue should flow to the states and how they should flow to the states. Article 275 talks about revenues in grants in the aid of revenues. Article 282 was meant to be an exceptional situation, used very, very rarely, where the union believes that some of the objectives are not being met, the states are not serious. But it looks like union has initiated the centrally sponsored schemes in almost all the matters that should be taken up or taken care of by the states. So in essence, the constitutional division of or distribution of power is something else, and its actual implementation by the usage of Article 282 is something else. Once the state are onboarded onto a centrally sponsored scheme, they become bound by the provisions of that scheme, and hence they lose the capability to innovate in that particular field, taking away the whole autonomy. Obviously, when the schemes and policies will be designed by the union, they will face the problem of uniformity, one size fits all. I remember a funny case when Manrega was launched, basically 100 days of guaranteed employment creation throughout the country. And initially, only few works were allowed in rural areas for which the state now guaranteed 100 days of employment. At that point of time, even the wages across the country was same, and the work that could be done was either creation of rural water harvesting infrastructure like ponds or maybe rural roads. Now, a state like Kerala, where all the rural roads were already made and there is no water problem, found it very, very difficult to employ its unemployed people who sought employment. It took 7 to 8 years for the union to make changes to the rules where the flexibility was given to the states to allow other kinds of rural works to engage people in unskilled employments. And later on, semi-skilled employment was also added on to the list. But the problem is that, for example, if you look at the Manrega, sort of one of the first flagship centrally sponsored schemes, the wages were decoupled, were coupled with the CPI, agricultural labor, which is the consumer price index for rural areas, which meant that uniformly across the state the same wages would be given, and then the states were allowed the flexibility to increase the Manrega wages if their states have high inflation or maybe higher standard of living, so probably you need to pay more. But the states are always financially constrained, making sort of gainful employment by the state completely last priority of the presidents. Because if I can get 300 400 rupees uh, in some other work, why would I go to the state to seek 200 rupees of work, which is probably half of the minimum wages that are being provided by the state? So you can see that it creates multiple problems. Centrally sponsored schemes also uh, sort of, apart from uniformity, create an issue of sort of force the state to squeeze the already squeezed thin resource of the state. Most of the states have to be reliant on, because the states, the union's revenue, union's grant to sustain their revenue accounts, and now you force them on capital expenditure as well. Because once you decide to onboard a centrally sponsored scheme, and if you are a normal state like UP, Bihar, Kerala, you have to guarantee 40% of the expenditure. Now, for that 40% of the expenditure, a lot of the states have gone to the market to borrow, to put the 40% account, to put the 40% of the expenditure in the account. Only then the union would release the 60%. So indirectly, the centrally sponsored schemes have been responsible to increase the deficit of the states as well. Does that make sense to everyone? And that is why a reform in the centrally sponsored schemes are needed, for which I would highly recommend you to go to the current affairs, daily current affairs page of Anantam IAS, where you would see all these articles along with the way forward, what has been recommended by Niti Aayog, what has been recommended by the Finance Commission. So please go to that page and see the Constitution 113th Amendment Bill. Okay, so it has been wrongly written here as 130th. It is 113th Constitution Amendment Bill 2025. The bill which is very, very problematic on various counts. We'll discuss the provision of the bill, we'll discuss some of the reasons as to why this bill would be needed, and we'll also discuss obvious problems with this Constitutional Amendment Act. It is important from the perspective of GS paper 2, because GS paper 2 along various lines directly deal or indicate us to prepare these Constitutional Amendment Act. For example, in the line 1, It says the constitutional amendment and its evolution. Since it tries to bring the amendment of the constitution, we have to prepare this. Apart from that, it expects us to prepare the legislature as well as the executive, its responsibilities. It's going to directly impact the executive, and hence we have to prepare this bill. This bill has been brought in the context of a lot of the ministers, the chief ministers being detained, arrested, and they continue to retain those executive positions and manage their portfolios from within the jail. The response, for example, Mr. Arvind Kejriwal was in jail, 3 of his ministers were in jail, then many chief ministers on various occasions, for instance, Madhu Koda had been in jail, and we have seen ample cases initiated by the central investigating agencies where a lot of the political appointees have been kept under detention, and they have chosen not to resign, interfering or raising maybe the question that is this governance from the jail tenable situation or sustainable situation for India or not. And using these trends in the recent 5 to 10 years, Modi government has brought a bill to amend the Constitution of India by 113th Constitutional Amendment Bill. What it does is that it seeks to amend the Constitution at 3 specific places. Number 1 is that it seeks to amend Article number 75. So it seeks to amend Article 75, which deals with the Central Council of Ministers. Then it seeks to amend Article 164, which deals with the state level executive. And then it seeks to amend Article 239 AA, which seeks to provide the provision for the National Capital Territory of Delhi, NCT of Delhi. Apart from that, it will also be applicable for Puducherry as well as Jammu and Kashmir, and those changes will be brought in the Organization Bill Act through which these 2 union territories were created. So what it does is that it is going to add clauses in each of these articles, making sure that as soon as any member of the Council of Ministers is arrested for a charge that might invite punishment for greater than 5 years, and if that person is detained in the custody for 30 consecutive days, then on 31st day, immediately after 30-day period of detention ends, it will be the responsibility of the Prime Minister to recommend the removal of that minister from the Council of Ministers. And obviously, if you apply the same logic, it will be the responsibility of the Chief Minister to recommend on the 31st day the removal of that Council of Ministers. And similarly, it will be the responsibility of the President to remove in case of Delhi. But what about the Prime Minister, or what about the Chief Ministers if they go to the jail? It will be the responsibility of the President and the Governor to remove them on the 31st day without any recommendation, because Prime Minister and Chief Ministers are the head of the Council of Ministers. So if they themselves go to the jail, there is no one to recommend, and they have to vacate that position. It also provides that after their release from the jail on bail, they can be restored back to power immediately. So let's say a person who is a minister was detained on 1st of January. Then on 31st of the January, the Prime Minister or the Chief Minister, as the case may be, will recommend the removal to President or the Governor, as the case may be. And after 60 more days of detention, that means on 30th of March, if they are released, they can be put back to their position without any legal consequence. Now, this Constitution Amendment Bill has been tabled and is being discussed. It has not been passed, but it has attracted the maximum number of editorials in both The Hindu as well as Indian Express. Around 7 to 8 editorials have been published in past 1 month since the time this amendment bill was tabled. And you can go to the Anantam website and you can see very, very comprehensive coverage that our website has done. So why a need was felt to bring such a constitutional amendment act? A need was felt because you have to understand that governance from jail had become a norm. So these are the arguments that have been used by the government and all those columnists who support the government. Governance from jail is problematic on various counts. It is problematic because as an executive, a lot of the serious responsibilities lie on your shoulder, and if the time at which your subordinates can meet you is limited to one meeting per day, probably it is not the right thing for the people of that state or for the people of the country for the executive to remain in detention and continue to hold the portfolio. It is going to hinder with the responsibility and the oath of welfare that you have taken as a council of minister. So governance from a jail is not an ideal situation. Also, on various occasions, for instance, people like Madhukura, who was the chief minister of Jharkhand, he was arrested in 2009 but continued to be the chief minister, and few years down the line he was convicted, and only then, because conviction attracts disqualification, that he had to leave. So this is not an ideal situation. The Representation of the Peoples Act 1951 section 8, which disqualifies people from contesting or from being an MP or an MLA, from a representative, is only applicable on conviction. Here we are not talking about conviction, we are only talking about the judicial custody or the preventive custody or the preventive detention. So if the person is convicted, there is no question, there is no constitutional amendment act that is needed, because the law is going to take care of it. But we are here talking about the detention which does not arises out of a conviction. It is just that CBI, Enforcement Directorate, Anti-Corruption Bureau has arrested you and and the judiciary has put you under the judicial custody, and you have been denied the bail from the courts. So that's the number one reason. Number two reason is that in a uh, we have seen various prominent ministers' name taken in various corruption scandals. For example, under Nehru cabinet, T.T. Krishnamachari was also associated with a big corporate name, and his name came into the investigation. But these were highly legitimate people. T.T. Krishnamachari, who, as soon as his name got embroiled into some controversy, he chose to resign from the cabinet minister. He gave up the ministerial position to be the part. That was the convention, and now the government believes that this convention now has to be constitutionalized. Because if people choose to ignore the convention, some mandatory legal provision should exist in the constitution to force upon the people to follow through on that convention. Also, if you look at the equal treatment of equally situated, the rules for the civil services, which is the permanent executive as opposed to the political executive, temporary executive, civil service conduct rules mandate that as soon as a person is taken in custody for more than 48 hours, they are removed from their postings and they become suspended. So if this is the rule which is applicable on subordinates, a similar rule or similarly situated rule should be applicable on the temporary executive. Why does an IAS or an IPS officer has to be suspended? Because we believe that if you are a superintendent of police, or if you are a district magistrate, or if you're a secretary, and if you are in detention, you will not be able to fulfill the responsibilities that have been given to you by the respective ministry or the department. That's why it is better that while you continue to be in the service, but you're suspended. You're no more acting as you're not responsible for any charge that you have to deliver. You are devoid of all the responsibilities. Complete your investigation, get released on bail, and then maybe the department will decide whether to give you further posting or the appointment or not. And since this kind of rule was missing for political executive, it was time that we should create this kind of a rule for the political executives as well. However, there is a minor difference there's a subtle abnormality with which, or the context in which this bill has been brought. In last 4 to 5 years, we have seen most of the political executives that have gone to jail, they belong to opposition parties, and the case against them have been taken up by the central investigating agencies. The agencies like the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, Enforcement Directorate. CBI takes care of the Prevention of Corruption Act. Enforcement Directorate takes care of money laundering, Prevention of Money Laundering Act. And these are the two main mechanisms, apart from National Security Act, which is a preventive detention act, to put a lot of the politicians holding the charge of minister mainly from the opposition party. So the problem is not the constitutional amendment. The problem is the backdrop in which the Constitutional Amendment Act has been brought, which has been used by a lot of the editors, a lot of the columnists to criticize and decouple between the constitutional amendment and the intent behind that amendment. So the intent seems to be to misuse the central investigating agencies to put people in detention and then to remove them from their position. And if, for instance, Arvind Kejriwal, or for that matter any chief minister, is removed on 31st day, and if they continue to be in custody for 1 year, obviously when they come back, the political scenario, the intra-party dynamics would have altered by a great margin, and it could be difficult for any prominent politician to take back the position where they left the active politics and went to jail. So it sort of interferes with India's federal structure. Also, the problem is that it violates the basic principle of India's legal jurisprudence, that is the presumption of innocence. Innocent until proven guilty. So what we are doing, we under investigation, we take people under detention. Suppose judiciary denies them the bail, so they go to the judicial custody, and within 31 days they are removed from a particular ministerial post as a punishment. So we have penalized a political leader before that person was held accountable or was convicted, not even convicted, charge sheeted for a particular crime. It goes against the basic principles which is applicable in India's criminal law. That is the presumption of guilt. Presumption of innocence. So in this case, we are presuming the political leaders, we are presuming the members of the Council of Ministers to be guilty just because they have been arrested or detained by a member of the detained by a central investigating agency. Also, it is problematic for other reasons. It might create a lot of political instability. For instance, a particular minister was arrested, put in custody. On 31st day, that person was removed, forcing the chief minister or the prime minister to appoint a new council of minister. And then when the person comes back, forcing the council of minister to choose either the same person, it is going to create a turmoil in the equilibrium that might have settled in the states. And that is why a lot of scholars have suggested that instead of this, so they recognize that these are the genuine issues because of which some action has to be taken, but this action should not be taken. According to them, there are two ways that are clearly applicable way forward, which you can go and read on the website Anantam IAS, Daily Current Affairs. One is that either you set up a tribunal to try the cases against the ministers of state and the center, or the second way forward is that you create a separate dedicated fast track court, which will be mandated to hear these cases on a day-to-day basis and complete the trial in 60 days, 90 days, so that within 3 months you have the result, whether the person is convicted or whether the person will be vindicated of all the charges, and that will give us and will save us this kind of judicial problems or injustice that might be committed just because of the misuse of the central investigating agencies. So a lot of the controversy will still keep on erupting with this, because the government looks like will come again and try to push through this constitutional amendment act in winter session, and which is when we will see more and more debate in this particular matter. So let's now move on to the next article, right to safe roads under Article 21. So the Bombay High Court, in a case known by own motion versus the Maharashtra state, has recognized safe roads as a matter of fundamental right under Article 21. Now, why this news has been taken up is obviously not because polity deals or governance deals with the bad status of road, deaths and accidents caused because of potholes. The core concern is constitutional legal rights. And in the foundation classes, in we have seen in the QIP classes as to how Article 21 has widened over time. It has widened through the procedure that is established by law to be just, fair and reasonable, procedural due process under Maneka Gandhi, then enormous widening of life and liberty through various judgments, where the Supreme Court started out taking a reference from Moon versus Illinois, that life under Article 21 is just not mere animal existence. It is supposed to be a human life. And so the reading of human rights under Article 21 became a natural, flawless process. And by extending the same logic, the Bombay High Court has now read Article 21 to include the right to safe roads. But why does the road safety needs consideration and due focus in polity and governance? Because good roads is just not a matter of infrastructure under GS paper 3. It is a matter of governance, because out of 1,45,000, 1,50,000 deaths that are caused, and multiple you can say disability arising out of bad road conditions, you can see that most of the deprivations are caused on to the people who are traveling on two-wheelers. And so two-wheelers, people who are riding two-wheelers largely belong to middle or lower income group. So it is a matter of equity, social justice as well. People traveling in safer cars, expensive cars, or even cars are most likely or less likely to face any deprivation, disability arising out of, or at least the probability is very low as compared to people who are riding two-wheelers. Why road safety becomes a problem, especially in a municipal corporation, which is the richest municipal corporation in the entire Asia, is because of the, you can say, diffused responsibility. Maintenance of urban road is the responsibility of PWD department, municipality, and also the private contractors, which are extended the licenses to construct and maintain the roads. And so this diffused responsibility has given the power to the High Court to use something that is known as mandamus and innovating it in the form of continuing mandamus to force the state authority to come and fulfill their responsibility. What is mandamus? Mandamus is the ability of the court to get you enjoy your fundamental right if your fundamental right is being violated as a result of non-fulfillment of legal obligation by a public authority. So in this particular case, private contractors wanted to say that how can you extend mandamus on us? We are a private contractors. It is the responsibility of the municipality or the PWD department. Supreme Court extended and covered them under mandamus, forcing either the corporation or the PWD to get the work done through their private contractor. And that is why it is important to understand that Supreme Court, ushering in doctrinal creativity, can innovate the writs. And that's why when people ask me as to how it is supposed to be used like this is what is written in Lakshmikant or in DD Basu, but in this particular case Supreme Court or High Court have used it in the other way. This is the reason as to how the courts can modify their writs, because if you read Article 32 clause 2 very clearly, it says including writs in the nature of, can issue orders, directions or writs including in the nature. And so Supreme Court has issued continuing mandamus on multiple occasions for especially environmental laws. Multiple MC Mehta cases are testimony to this fact as to how Supreme Court can endlessly modify the writ jurisdiction to enforce an outcome on either the public authority or on the private developers as well. So this is generally a very minor example of widening. In the books it will not be updated because they will be printed next year, so it is your responsibility to go to the Lakshmikant and add this new fundamental right which has been interpreted by the Mumbai or Bombay High Court. Let's now move on to the next article. Supreme Court has come out with a very strong observation and a judgment on section 132 of Bharatiya Saksh Adhiniyam or Evidence Act, section 132, which basically bars the executive or the police involving any advocate or compelling any advocate or a legal counsel in a criminal trial. So this is a very unique case where Gujarat police summoned a lawyer once the client of the lawyer had already secured a bail, and the summons was extended on the pretext of obtaining more details from the advocate. So you know that whenever a criminal trial is initiated, everyone has the right for a legal counsel. And this relationship between client and legal counsel is protected under utmost secrecy and trust. And this is what section 132, this is the reason why section 132 was created. Otherwise, no one would feel free to come out honestly in front of a legal counsel. It is very important for the legal counsel who is defending you to know exact details of all the events. All the antecedents should be known to the legal counsel. And here the police directly called and invited the legal counsel into the investigation, against which the legal counsel went to the High Court. High Court upheld the summon, and that's why under special leave petition, the legal counsel went to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court clearly upheld section 132 of Bharatiya Saksh Adhiniyam, saying that it is an extension of the principle under Article 20, Clause 3, which is right against self incrimination. No one shall be compelled to be an evidence against themselves. And since legal counsel is an extension of the self, you cannot compel that person also to become a party to an investigation. So this was appreciated and much hailed judgment. You can go on our website and read in detail as to how it is in US, how is it in UK, comparison, where very strong protections are extended to the legal counsel, to the advocates who are defending the accused person. So if you talk about its relevance for the UPSC examination from the point of view of prelims, what is important is what section 132 deals, 132 of Bharatiya Saksh Adhiniyam, as you can see, deals with. No advocate shall be compelled to disclose any communication made to him in course of his employment as an advocate or a legal counsel. And this is what Supreme Court has upheld in this landmark judgment. So just that, nothing else needed to be known from the perspective of the polity in prelims. It can be asked, which recently section 132 has been in news because of the following, and that's it. But Supreme Court has made an exception that if the police has strong and concrete evidence that the legal counsel has helped the accused person to perpetuate the crime, then obviously that person becomes a party to the crime. But if the person is just carrying out the responsibility of his or her profession, then you cannot invite that person to be a part of the investigation. So this last news for today is Aabhar online store, where the Indian Railways has decided to integrate Aabhar portal. So what is Aabhar portal? We use Flipkart and Amazon, which is a platform which connects the supplier and the people who want to purchase online items. So the government came up with government e-marketplace gem portal, because government on a day-to-day basis has to acquire a lot of goods and services. Government needs to acquire vehicles. So now any vehicle order that has to be placed will be placed on the gem portal. And so within that gem portal, the government has initiated this Aabhar initiative, where the idea is to promote the rich cultural heritage, the GI tag products of India, one district, one product of India, because government, apart from vehicles, apart from stationery, apart from various other stuff that it needs to acquire, conducts a lot of functionals, ceremonies on a day-to-day basis. Award functions are to be conducted, for which, let's say there are 100 recipients to an award, for you want to give some gifts to them, and these kinds of items might not be available on gem portal. And so for that, a unique cultural heritage initiative has been created, so that any department which needs some local craftsmanship, artistic creation to be gifted as a souvenir to, let's say, foreign visiting dignitaries, they can just log in into Aabhar portal, put an order, place an order there, and they will get it delivered. And this is what Indian Railway has integrated with itself. It is absolutely necessary for you to go to the website and keep on reading the daily current affairs. Right now, when I'm recording this lecture, there is no internet, so I can't show you. There is some outage because of some problem in the wiring. So please go and keep on reading the daily current affairs. Our team is working extensively to curate those articles for you. So please be please watch our daily news in-depth analysis, and also read daily current affairs on our website. Thank you so much.